Well, welcome to the final session of iGaming Next 24. It's only fitting that we finish with the event's biggest star. With me this afternoon is ESPN journalist and commentator Stephen A. Smith.
How y'all doing?
Yeah. Stephen A., it's great to have you here. We're going to touch on sports betting. It's a sports betting conference, so we'll touch on that in a minute. But before we get into it, I wanted to ask you about a few broader media trends and some current events.
Right.
You had recently moved your podcast, and I know it's much more than just a podcast, and we'll talk about that in a second, from Odyssey to iHeart. Can you help explain the decision-making process? Or was it simply just a matter of dollars and cents?
Well, no, it wasn't a matter of dollars and cents because it wasn't that much dollars. So let's get that out the way. It was definitely a huge platform that iHeart has, one of the top distributors of podcasting in the world, and we understand that. And obviously the person that runs that division is Julie Talbert. It's a person that I've had a relationship with over the last 20 years or so. When I used to work at Fox Sports Radio, then called under the Clear Channel banner, she was obviously a boss there as well. So I have an incredible relationship with her. Got a lot of faith in her, and I know that distribution is everything, marketing is everything, and very few entities are as good at it as they are. And so I knew that in the audio stratosphere, that was a partnership that I wanted to engage in. Outside of that, prioritizing my independence, because even though I'm an employee for ESPN, I carved it out of my contract where it's separate and apart from that. So it's 100% owned and operated by me. And as a result of that, on the YouTube platform, all of that revenue comes to me, the sponsorship and all of that stuff, all the decisions are made by me. I am the boss, and I like that feeling. It's something that I worked hard for, and I made sure it happened.
So we call it a podcast, but it's more than just a podcast, right?
Well, it's more of a podcast because I built a studio. I came out of my own pocket in excess of 7 figures, and I built a television studio because I want the license to be able to create content and license that content to various networks. It could be a half-hour show for a sports network. It could be a weekly 1-hour show for a news network. It could be a daytime talk show. It could be a nighttime talk show. And I'm put it in Jersey City initially, in all honesty, because it was the third of the cost that it would be in New York City. So I wanted to be a bit fiscally responsible in that regard. But the other thing is that my plan, my intent is ultimately to have a studio in New York and a studio in LA, because obviously I'm bi-coastal and I'm in both coasts a lot of times. And I want to be in a position where I have a studio that ultimately can have a live studio audience. So whatever show that I do, based on the things that I already described, I can do that in front of a live studio audience. I'm not fearful or reticent about interacting with the audience. I like to give the impression I'm somebody that you can reach out and touch. And I don't want you reaching out and touching me when I'm off. When I'm with my family, friends, and all that stuff, I want you to get the hell out of my face. I don't feel like being bothered with all of that. But when I'm working. And part of working is ingratiating yourself with that audience and making sure that that audience knows you're neither fearful nor hesitant to reach out and touch them, just like you want them to reach out and touch you and interact with them. I think that's a more personable touch. I don't think everybody can do that. I don't think everybody wants to do that. But that makes me a bit different. And it's not only something I don't fear, it's something I welcome.
Talk about some of the projects you guys have working on with the production company. You mentioned to me offline a documentary.
Well, my production company's name is the SAS Productions. I already produced and executive produced and co-produced a docuseries with Chris Paul, CP3 of the NBA, called Why Not Us, which was an 8-part series on the University of North Carolina Central's basketball program and their coach there, Coach Moten, because Chris Paul was close to him. We've already been greenlit, and we're coming out with a project in a couple of months. Me, along in concert with Religion of Sports, which is owned by Strahan and Brady and those guys. Sports Commentary is going to be titled Up for Debate, and it's the history of sports commentators from Howard Cosell to me, to today's day and age, where you've got the Joe Rogans, the Pat McAfees, the Dan Lebertards, and various others of the world, where it was, where it is, where the hell is it going? And so I'm doing that. That'll be out in a couple of months. And I'm not at liberty to get into specifics, but I'm in partnership with Get Lifted Productions, owned by John Legend, along with Mike Jackson, and in partnership with Michael B. Jordan as well, with a drama series that I created and it's been greenlit. And when I'm allowed to give more details by whom, I will do so. That should be just a couple of weeks away or so. But that's a big, big deal to me, and that was something that was very important to me. I'm one of those guys. I grew up watching Dynasty and Dallas, who shot JR and stuff like that. And, I act in the soap opera General Hospital as we speak and stuff like that. And it's always been a dream of mine to create a drama series. Think Scandal with Kerry Washington and stuff like that, but loosely based on my life and the kind of things that I've been exposed to throughout my life as a reporter. I mean, you talk about everything. I've seen athletes involved in all kinds of criminal activity. I've seen athletes get murdered. I've seen them accused and indicted and ultimately convicted of murder. I've seen embezzlement. I've seen all this kind of stuff and all the kind of things that you see in a drama series. Believe it or not, my career has touched on all of those subjects at one point in time or another, needless to say, death threats and things of that nature. I've experienced that too. And so for me to be a creator, to come up with a drama series is a dream come true for me. So it was really nice to make that happen.
Most of the people here probably know you as a TV personality or as a podcast host, but that's not where you started your career. You're a print media guy to start with. Mm-hmm. But you made a name for yourself at the Philadelphia Inquirer and a whole bunch of other stops. But the print media landscape has changed dramatically over the last 30 years. I guess, the question is how do you see how local sports coverage has been impacted?
Well, I think it's been impacted dramatically because you have to remember, and specifically for me as an African American, you have to remember when I was named a general sports columnist by the Philadelphia Inquirer in 2003, at the time, only 20 African Americans in this nation's history had earned that title. This is before the advent of social media, the Twitters, Facebook, TikToks of the world, et cetera, et cetera. You had to climb up the charts and ultimately get the title of a columnist to be licensed to opine and editorialize and give your opinion. And so when that happened for me in 2003, there was only 20 people of African American descent that preceded me. So that was an incredible honor that I was able to achieve. But in the same breath, that year, I was named the general sports columnist in March of 2003. That October was when I got signed on by ESPN. And so you go on ESPN and then you see the .com surge was coming forth. And there were a lot of people that were very, very scared because you saw the newspaper business dissipating before our very eyes because you saw the kind of clicks and stuff like that .com sites had. And it far exceeded the subscriber base that newspapers had. So you saw that coming. Then the advent of sports talk radio, which was really pretty much started by Mike and the Mad Dog in New York City. And on the news side, it was Rush Limbaugh on the politics and stuff like that. So you saw that and the kind of impact that they had. And you saw the proliferation of that industry really, really growing in the mind's eye of the American public. I saw all of this happening before our very eyes, so I knew that newspapers were going to be in a world of trouble because they weren't going to be able to compete with that. And then television came into play because rather than just relying on highlights and live entertainment and ultimately, things like SportsCenter and stuff coming along, now you were seeing more opinions thrown into the mix and incorporated. And so my attitude was, well, all right, I can write. Okay, I can report. I know I can talk. So I can do any of those things. Yep. And that's how I was looking at it. And then you pay attention to the dollars. And that's one of the things that I think has made me relatively successful over the years. I wouldn't call myself an aficionado about the world of business, but I've always paid attention. I read the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, LA Times, Bloomberg.
JohnWallStreet.
There you go. And all of that stuff I do. And why? Because I know that at the end of the day, I don't give a damn what kind of talent that you have. If it's not generating revenue, it's not going to last long because that's the world that we're living in. There's no way around it. People can slice it any way they want to. They can talk about the industries are dying or what kind of moral decisions are being made. You can debate all of that. In the end, people who run the show are looking at the bottom line. And you are either a contributor to the bottom line and an asset, or you are a liability. I understood that, and that's why I transitioned from newspapers ultimately to radio and television. And I tell you this, 2001, this was the real turning point for me. So I'm covering the Philadelphia 76. I'm covering Allen Iverson. They make a run to the NBA Finals, and I'm breaking all the stories. Yep. everything is coming through me. Stephen A. Smith, Philadelphia Inquirer, every story that mattered was coming right through me. And then the playoffs arise, and as they got deeper and deeper into the playoffs, I was shoved aside. I was asked to write an 800-word article, and that was that. And they left it. They got the investigation department involved, the feature department involved, profiles, and all of this other stuff, because they were trying to sell newspapers. And my voice meant close to nothing when I was the expert on the team, because they were trying to sell papers. And it wasn't about the content and the substantive of it all. It was about trying to sell papers because they were trying to make money. I could have knocked that because I had my hand out for a salary. So understanding that they needed to generate money, understanding that I needed them to generate money in order to get money for myself, it just crystallized in my mind, be about the business of making your employer money, first thing. And second thing, be committed to getting some of it for yourself. And that's how I've lived.
Has the local coverage suffered, though, now that you don't have those experts? Or do you see it as now, instead of having the newspaper writer, you have the podcast host in the local market?
Well, it suffered from a content standpoint because those who really, really know, not enough people care about because they're just in their local market. You care when there's something compelling being drawn out of it. If you don't have, like, I'm blessed and fortunate that I was covering Allen Iverson. Every damn day there was something when it came to him. But if you're covering most teams, they're not giving you that juicy material. So people are not caring about you unless you're in the local market. It's confined to that. But on a national scale, you're not drawing that kind of appeal. You're not having that kind of allure. And that's where it's problematic for those folks, because then they're stuck in that regional confine, and it's very, very difficult for them to branch out. But once you're national and you focus on a national scope and what's transpiring to the masses, that's when it comes into play. And for me, I've always had the mentality, I'm not about black appeal. I'm not about white appeal. I'm about mass appeal. I want everybody. And so what are the subject matters that appeals to the largest audience as a whole? That's how you make money. More eyeballs, more people paying attention to your content, more people concentrating and commenting on your content, et cetera, et cetera. That's how you ultimately build whatever brand you're trying to build. If it's minimized and confined to certain segments, but you don't necessarily have mass appeal, then you're not going to be able to generate mass revenue. And I like mass revenue, so I try to have mass appeal.
You made some comments last month that were directed at LeBron. You were talking about new media, and I think it was in context of something he said about Joel Embiid. What is the
Draymond, all of them, yeah.
Yeah. What does the term new media mean to you, and how do you think it's impacted the traditional?
Well, let me tell you what I think it means to them. What it means to them is that we're not conventional. We're not going to do things the way y'all customarily do it. We're not going to rely on your voice to express our message to the masses. It's a new day. We're taking over. And because of the followers and the subscribers that we may have, or, whether it be on social media, on YouTube channels, or whatever the case may be, we're going to have just as, if not more, of a profound impact on the audience out there than you guys normally did. That's what makes you old media. It's the new media. I told them, you can dream all you want to. That ain't going to work with me. At the end of the day, how much can they trust you to be true, honest, and authentic about what's really, really going on? How hesitant are you going to be to really, really tell the story? You're going to give your spin because you want people to believe stuff, because primarily you're going to be talking about yourself or your contemporaries. And even if they're not your contemporaries, because you have people from other genres who are fans of yours, and you prided yourself in being cool and everything like that, as opposed to being distant enough so you could be objective enough to tell the story instead of their story or your story, you're not going to be able to give the masses what I can give the masses, because you're going to care about those relationships. I'm not going to give a damn. I'm going to do what I know the public wants, because I know That's who I answer to. You don't believe you answer to them. In fact, you, in all likelihood, your belief is, well, I'm answering to the subject matters that I'm covering because they're of my ilk, so I'm going to look out for them. And that's your definition of realness. I know better, and I'll be there to point out when you're being inauthentic in that regard. And you're going to have to put your authenticity up against mine as an athlete. Good luck with that.
Are the players hurting themselves in the leagues by taking that approach?
That depends on how stupid they are. Seriously, it depends on how stupid they are. I mean, if you are going to go out there and speak on subjects you're not educated about.
Kyrie, you mean?
It's a problem. Say what?
Kyrie?
What about him?
He says all sorts of crazy things.
Well, he has said all sorts of crazy things, but he talked about his own personal beliefs. It's not somebody that's reporting on things. And that's what I think that, you know, he got himself in trouble because there's a level of sensitivity, particularly in this day and age, that you must exercise. And there are certain subjects that you shouldn't touch. And unfortunately, he wanted to touch on things that he was ill-equipped to touch on. And even though he didn't say much, he just retweeted something. It gave the impression that it had his approval and his validation. And that's where he got himself in trouble. And so you've got to watch yourself there. It's not a mistake LeBron James or many other athletes made. And LeBron James is quite a brilliant individual. And a lot of times, a lot of these guys are brilliant, but it's also because of the access that they received. You and I were at a dinner together last night, and it was one of the most fascinating dinners I've ever been a part of in my life. It was a bunch of brilliant people in there. I was clearly the dumbest person in the room.
I was there, so that's not true.
And I loved it. I loved it. I loved being surrounded by brilliant dudes that were all smarter than me and stuff like that because I was there to be edified and learn lessons. And LeBron is like that in many, many ways. So give him credit where credit is due. The problem is when you turn around doing those things, but then turn around and try to act as if you're authentic when there are so many various interests that you may have that people are not privy to. You never know who's privy to it. So they'll know that you're inauthentic, and eventually you'll get caught out there when you do that. And that's usually what happens to these guys.
You talk about appealing to the masses, and I think that's an interesting segue to my next question. J.J. Redick recently made some headlines for saying that, you know, he was being critical of the fans, saying, you know, the fans don't want to be educated. They just want to enjoy the game. I put out a story earlier this week suggesting that casual bettors are kind of the same way. They're more concerned about camaraderie and entertainment than they are about winning. You were one of the first, if not the first, to kind of embrace debate, if you will. Was that, you know, was that the North Star? Reach the masses. The amount of people who want to be educated about the game is small. To reach the masses, we need to talk about popular topics.
J.J. Redick is a brilliant dude. I mean, he really, really is. Was a really good player, one of the great shooters the game has ever seen. His podcast, The Old Man and the Three. You want to know about basketball, you want to learn about basketball, you listen to J.J. Redick. The issue, however, is that sometimes you could be so knowledgeable that you're distant from the audience you're actually trying to reach. You could say that the audience doesn't want to learn. Tell them why. I just got into a back and forth with Clay Travis about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What was my argument with him? He was talking about how it should be eradicated across the board or whatever.